Hi, I'm Tania Spencer. While this project was on in 2009, the chairperson of the artists group in Lake Grace. So my role was basically an on-the-ground role, integrating Elke and Wouter into our community. I'll just start. We've got a slideshow there that just showcases our town and our environment and what we do there as an arts group and some of the places around town. So Lake Grace is in the eastern wheat belt of Western Australia. It's 350 kilometres southeast of Perth, approximately halfway between Perth and Esperance. We're a community of about 650 people with about 1,100 in our shire. Lake Grace is a major grain growing region that exports millions of tonnes of mostly wheat each year, along with oats, barley, peas, lupins and canola. We also produce sheep, both for their wool and meat, mainly export shippers, and fat lambs into specialised premium markets. We also produce the Odd Award-winning wine, AFL footballers, artists and writers. We have a very active arts community with a number of professional artists based in Lake Grace. The Lake Grace Artists Group, who were the actual hosts for Elke and Wouter, held regular exhibitions, workshops, events and residencies. We work with the community and school to develop art awareness and understanding of contemporary art practice in a very sporting orientated town, as the Narrogin people alluded to earlier on today. Our fortunes with local government wax and wane depending on the current CEO at the Shire at the time. So one year you'll have a cultural plan that underpins every decision that is due to be made, and the next year it's never even been heard of. The group have also either made or helped develop a number of public artworks, in excess of 10 I think at last count, in the town, along with cultural interpretations of our historical history. Now, when Marco first proposed the space project, we had no hesitation in becoming involved. We were very pleased to be chosen to host an international artist residency. We planned for Elke and Wouter to reside in the nurses' quarters at the hospital and welcome them with a special dinner in early November 2009. We hosted artist talks featuring local artists as well as our visiting artists as an initial getting to know you exercise at the Lake Grace Multi-Art Space along with the community. It was an open event. The art space is a privately owned venue. It's a large 500-metre space that in a former life was a supermarket, and it's right smack bang in the centre of town. This is where Elke and Wouter were based during their residency. There was no way they could be missed by the curious folk who think, now what have they got going on in there this time? It's really one of those buildings that if the door is open, the passers-by just tend to pop in quite readily, whether they're connected to the arts or not, so it's perfect really, or nearly. Anyway, nothing but $50,000 and a few more Art on the Move training sessions wouldn't fix. My role with this project, along with Michelle, as I said, was on the ground to help Elke and Wouter settle in, promote the program through our local and regional networks, show them our town, our farms. Harvest was in full swing at the time, so trips out to the paddock on the harvester, shifting sheep into newly harvested paddocks. We showed off the biodiversity of our natural environment, our wide open spaces and clean air, and the time and large distances of travel soon became a solid reality for our artists. Fortunately, my connections with the subject matter that our artists were most interested in were first-hand. My husband, Darren, is a shearing contractor and a wool buyer. Out at the shearing shed on Brockham Stud, Elke and Wouter observed the professional shearing teams working, with Wouter having a turn at using the handpiece in the shed. As we have up to 30 employees to house and feed, we do kill our own meat. For rations, which is a traditional term in the shearing industry, we usually kill 2 to 3 sheep per week to put through the mess, and the choice offal is usually taken to town and given to those retired farmers that pine for a bit of liver, kidneys, heart or brains. So after some initial apprehension by our artists, they got on with documenting the process of killing the sheep, the process that is second nature to most people on the land. Although there is change slowly happening, as many of the younger farmers do prefer not to kill their own meat. So when the kill was completed, the meat is transported back to town for refrigeration, and the remaining offal is tied up in the skin for disposal, with Wouter remarking it even has its own suitcase. Darren also took our artists down to Wellard Rural Feedlot and the shipper shearing sheds in Mundajong. And although it was interesting for them, there wasn't really a lot going on at the time, as there were no shipper boats no shipper boats due in or being loaded at that time. So they moved on. With the direction the project set, and as a community, we had to trust that Elke and Wouter would treat this subject matter with a sensitivity and an impartiality. We introduced Elke to local spinners who taught her how to card and hand spin. Also acquired another spinning wheel to help speed up the process, so Wouter didn't feel too left out. We accessed black merino wool from contacts at West Coast Wools. Oh, it's time, yeah. Oh, I haven't got much to go. For the making of the carpet and white wool from our own wool stores. A trip down to Albany Spinners and Weavers that operate out of the Vancouver Arts Centre located a suitable loom, and the help needed to set up the loom in preparation for the rug. As I was speaking to Elke and Wouter, there was literally and physically blood, sweat and tears gone into this rug, with over 100 hours of labour, which works out to 26 full-time weeks' work. It's a very lengthy project that was finished in time for the sacrifice to be performed on it whilst in Bahrain. Local artist Michelle Slarke travelled over to Bahrain to meet our artists and witness the second part of the project and investigate the material for a book, a component of the project that came about as the residency evolved, that ended up providing a collection of research and different points of view. Sorry. Yeah, last paragraph. This project was a 2-month event that allowed the community to come and go at will, self-regulating the amount of interest and discussion on the perceptions of and subject to the live export trade, as well as debates on what art is and isn't. It could have been generic to any one of the towns in the south of the state, apart from with the wool coming from each respective area, but it opened a dialogue on a global trade practice that at its most basic is one of simple supply and demand, and at its most complicated, one of moral, ethical and cultural differences. The project to the other end, along with Michelle's book, Point of Slaughter, really is a global artwork informed by a sense of place. I still feel the true impact of this project is not yet realised, as the graphic nature of the documentation of the topical subject will carry on in its own form. Lake Grass Artists Group would like to thank Elke, Wouter and Michelle and the ISCA team for making this project possible.
Thank you. So I will follow up explaining a little bit more about the project, but as you already elaborately told a lot about it, I will keep it short and then pass it on to Elke. We are artist duo from the Netherlands, working together since 2005. Very briefly, our work is based around the question of how art can contribute to the process of democratization of the public domain and space. Through our practice, we try to bring politics back to the level of the street by involving and confronting people with political dilemmas, or by unraveling the power of the status quo. So for our research in Lake Grace, we from the start were very much interested in the live export of sheep. I remember also in the beginning when we came by taxi from the airport that Sue was telling a story about the live export and the boats going from Fremantle all the way to the Middle East, and there were even, she was telling, there were sharks following the boats, eating from the sheep that were thrown overboard all the time because they would die because of suffocation, etc. And these sharks would follow the ships all the way to the Middle East, so creating some kind of artificial migration stream. So that image of the shark and following the trade really stayed close to us, and we want, considering us as sharks, we sort of
it's probably
try to follow.
Myth, huh?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
But we try to follow all the way to the other end. So we did some research in Lake Grace itself about the production of the sheep and what it all involves, and then we followed on. And the work that we did. So here you see the boat. Not far from here, they leave to the Middle East with thousands of sheep on board. what we did, we started to make a copy of a Baluchi funeral carpet. Baluchi tribe is a nomadic tribe from the south of Iran, which was also partly at times present in Bahrain itself. And a funeral rug, and we started to spin the wool ourselves and started knotting this enormously time-consuming rug. And then when it was finished, we went in 2010. We went to Bahrain for the Eid al-Adha, the Feast of Sacrifice. We went to a local feedlot to look for an Australian sheep. We eventually found one, and then asked a local family to do the ritual slaughter of the animal on the carpet that we provided it for. And then when the bloodstained carpet was finished after the project, we sent it back to Australia, which is now in the exhibition. So it's all for us important to look at the global trade from the perspective that it somehow connects to different localities because of the economic factor. But there's almost a void of a lack of knowledge about each other's cultural values. So this project tries to somehow create an image of the different cultures and connect that together. One of the justifications of the trade, because it's under huge critique, as you all know, is that from the trade on they come up with arguments of defending it and legitimatizing the trade by saying that, for example, it needs to have a life export, for example, because in the Middle East they don't have refrigerators, or they need it for ritual slaughter. Well, in the case of the refrigerators, a lot of people do have refrigerators, so that's nonsense. And in the case of ritual slaughter, I think 90% of the sheep directly go to the local abattoir and are killed over there. So there's this 10% of still people doing it for ritual meanings and purposes, but it's more a cover-up. Basically, it means that it's much more cheaper to go with these enormous vessels all the way to the Middle East instead of the small-scale refrigerated air transport of chilled meat. So it's all about economics, I think. So I've seen in many globalized industries the financial benefits outweigh the cultural values and, of course, animal and, in this case, even human rights.
Yeah. So nowadays in all political discussion, profit seems very much to overrule ethical arguments. Information that is provided is often incomplete or false, and in the case of the life export, this also counts for the information provided by the animal welfare organizations that try to destabilize the industry by spreading images stigmatizing Arabs as barbarians, as well as for the exporters who, as a response, implement imperialistic campaigns in order to educate the people in the Middle East on how to treat animals. And we wonder, like, what can we do in order to make sure that the global connections we have are based on a more mutual respect and caring for one and another? And how can we create space for discussion based on democratic values like transparency, universal human and animal rights on a global scale, instead of talking about these issues only from a financial perspective? Of course, you could argue that we live in a differentiated, diverse and scattered world where every locality has its own political, ethical and social values, and that we therefore should try to minimize universal value judgments. But the reality of today is one in which globalized corporations decide contemporary politics to a great extent. So how can we, working in the field of culture, influence this distorted worldview? How do we communicate that we need to find strategies in order to oppose the opportunistic, globalized corporate ethics? Does corporate social responsibility really exists, or is it just a farce to cover up the ugly side effects of the neoliberal principles? In order to find the answers to all these questions, I think we need to analyze and have a better understanding of local politics. So in this example, we will look at what has happened and what is still happening in Bahrain. In March 2011, the call for democracy in Bahrain was cracked down violently. Since then, human rights have been violated continuously. Hundreds of political detainees were subject to arrest and torture on the back of practicing illegitimate rights to freedom of expression and assembly. 14 activists who were detained since last March are now on hunger strike in protest to the continued suppression of the people of Bahrain, including the continued arbitrary detention, the unfair trials, the sentencing of innocent people for peacefully protesting, demanding rights, and the continued policy of starvation of the people through the unfair dismissal and suspension from work. The activists who are now on hunger strike, they call for an urgent intervention from the international community to put an end to the continuous violations of the human rights. And we hope this call speaks to you all. The Australian live export industry is collaborating with the government that is slaughtering their own citizens as a response to their call for democracy. And these people that are being killed are the consumers of an Australian product. Many people here are depending financially on the consumers in Bahrain. Therefore, this revolution, I think, needs your support, because I think this is a world that we share, and we are connected, and you are connected also through a product, and therefore also responsible. So please, I would like to ask you to act upon it by getting informed and involved.
Do we still have 5 minutes for Michelle?
Okay, for me. Hello, I'm Michelle Slarke, and I 1 minute? I'll stop now. I'm going to just switch track a bit and talk to you about the background to my book, Point to Slaughter. As has been said, Elke and Wouter were resident in Lake Grace in 2009, and they invited me to be involved in a creative text as a spin-off to their carpet project. And that has had various concepts and evolutions from me being one of a number of writers to be writing it solo. In November 2010, I went to Bahrain and met up with Elke and Wouter there for Eid al-Adha, the Feast of Sacrifice. And I took with me questions from my community about what they would like to ask the people that we interviewed. So we interviewed people such as the Bahraini representative for the people for the ethical treatment of animals. We interviewed Meat and Livestock Australia staff who went to the Bahraini livestock feedlot where the Australian sheep go. And Luna, a writer and translator that we met, organised for a sheep to be slaughtered at her house for Eid al-Adha, and that was done on Elke and Wouter's carpet. So from there I returned to write, and the text follows the journey of the sheep, the export journey of the sheep from Western Australia to Bahrain. But it's about the people at each point of the journey and their views. It's not about the travels of the sheep. There were a number of different conceptual starting points for me and considerations that shaped the text. So I'm one of 11% of people living in rural Australia, and there is a lack of literature about our particular place, not only to describe and share it, but also to invent it. It wasn't until I was in my 20s that I read Western Australian literature that talked about a shared familiar experience of place. I feel that there is a vast gap between how the country is represented and how we as country people represent ourselves, and what is country and who are we anyway. A number of times I've been asked to organise photo shoots for the media coming to Lake Grace, and more often than not, the image that most Perth photographers want is of the old farmer with a weather-beaten face under the akubra. And so that old stereotype, along with that of the wide brown land, it's still forming that media representation of country people. And I think it's part of a wider collection of images of what it is to be Australian. And I also think that it forms artists' and writers' views of country Australia. But it's my experience, however, that people in rural communities are not only reflecting on their own culture and national and international issues, but they're also thinking about what's special about their place and what keeps them there. And they represent that in various ways, as you've seen in our slide presentation. So my starting point for the local part of the story was that I wanted to present rural people as contemporary, who did examine how they lived and how they fitted into the world. I wanted to be aware of and to rethink my own assumptions, and from there accord to the other people in the story that same consideration, and to show people as complex. So live export, it's a contentious issue. It became even more so last year when Four Corners did an expose of cattle slaughter in Indonesia. And there was public debate when that story broke, but generally I think there's little real examinations of issues by mainstream media. And most are just presented, as live export has been, as these polar opposites of the argument, and the debate between doesn't happen. So I wanted to bring it down to the personal, to the lived experience, close-up views, beyond those generic groups of farmers, activists, country, city, Muslims, Australians, the people from out there and over there. So the book is a mix of fiction and recorded interviews and conversations at each point of the journey. And there's the fictional farmer that goes from Western Australia wheat belt to Bahrain and back, the Australian activist who blogs about live export, and these interleaved with interviews from Bahrain and Australia, the auctioneer at the Katanning sheep sale, and a gathering of local farmers and artists in Lake Grace, to whom I showed the footage of the Animals Australia coverage of Italata in Kuwait and recorded their responses. There are also two pieces in the book about Google Earth views. That's the text on the wall in the reading room. And these refer not only to the immediacy and global accessibility of those views to make virtual visits to a place, but it's also about how we might be looking in at a culture and the different ways to do that, as we do as artists and writers, and as we have done through this space project. I was in Bahrain for 11 days, and I felt, even with research and correspondence, and particularly given the cultural difference, that I did not want to represent that I didn't want to speak for those people. I was well aware that it was an interaction with some people at a particular time and place. I didn't want to represent it as a whole. So for me, this project, Elke and Wouter's residency, my community's involvement, and my book, is about making connections with people and place, or not, and in order to ask questions and find ways to see different points of view, or not.